Welcome to another episode of What's at Stake, a Penta podcast. I'm your host, Brian DeAngelis, a partner here at Penta, and today I'm joined by one of my European colleagues, Viv O'Connor-Jemmett, who is a partner in our Dublin office. Viv has over 15 years of experience in online reputation management, and we're going to talk more about that today, especially in terms of crisis and reputation. We call it ORM around here, but Viv's going to explain all of that to us. So let's jump right into it. Viv, thanks for coming on, making your debut, I believe, on What's at Stake.
Thank you very much, Brian. I'm very much looking forward to the conversation.
Let's just start with you. Why don't you give us a little bit of your background and kind of your career, what brought you to Penta and the work you're doing here at the firm?
Sure. So I started my career at a very traditional public relations company in London and was very much focused on advising them around corporate strategy and reputational issues. But I very quickly noticed the importance of something that was emerging, and that was Google and to some extent social media. And what I could see was that the sort of traditional crises and issues that were facing companies were not just being played out through traditional channels, but were also emerging online as well. So I quickly formed a team that focused purely around the specialism of online reputation management and have spent the last 15 years advising various clients. And I'm very happy to be doing so now for Penta and focusing on some of the new and emerging challenges that are coming to these companies over the next few years and helping them find solutions, I suppose, that are groundbreaking in terms of the response and leveraging some of the skills that we have at Penta.
I'm glad you said 15 years. That was going to be my first follow-up of when you got into this, because I'm aging myself now, but I'm old enough to remember the days when we had a crisis and it was what is going to be in the next day's newspaper. And I spent a lot of my political career on the phone with reporters at 10 p.m., 11 p.m., midnight, trying to get a little bit changed here or there or correct something in the midst of a crisis before it ran in, the morning's edition or even online when they flipped everything over, 5, 6 a.m. I've seen in my career increasingly, we have whatever you want to call it, a 24-second news cycle, not a 24-hour news cycle anymore. But even regardless of what you might be doing in the media and how you might be winning or losing that battle with reporters, so much just takes off on Twitter, on other social media channels. So I'm assuming you went through a little bit of a similar process in your career, but anything I missed in terms of just how this has changed, especially in a crisis setting over the past couple of decades?
Well, I think you focused on the point that's so relevant to this conversation, and that is the speed at which media has changed. So like you at the very beginning of my career, it was something that might impact tomorrow's newspaper or a piece of broadcast coverage or an interview that might come out tomorrow. And there was some urgency around that. But I suppose the landscape has changed so much. Google, for example, is a search engine that doesn't forget. Issues that may have impacted a company a couple of years ago might still be present in terms of the results that are visible to stakeholders when they search online. So the speed has ramped up. You have social media at play as well, the immediacy of news and also misinformation and disinformation to some extent around issues that impact companies. So the speed has increased rapidly. The impact that has on a company in terms of its long-term reputation has definitely changed. And the area that I work within is ensuring that all of your traditional communications converts into something that is positive for you as a business and helps you achieve your long-term objectives. And also to some extent is influencing the stakeholders in a positive way, which I feel that traditional media has sometimes been slow to do, but that's what's rapidly changing within the area that I work in.
Let's jump right into that point of, the internet never forgets. And we've seen plenty of consumer brands, corporate brands where through their own fault or not might get in some political hot water. There might be a crisis. And to your point, that can last forever. And that could be the first or second result on Google when you go to search, whether it's for, a new version of that product or just to learn more about the company. So walk us through then what ORM is, both, we've talked about it in kind of the abstract sense of it, but the penta strategy and product, if you will, of ORM. And I'd love to hear how it's different from what brands have been doing in the past to respond to some of these crises.
Sure. So put simply, ORM, online reputation management, helps you establish the profile that you would otherwise maintain through traditional channels. So what it's helping you do is to build, enhance, and also protect your reputation in the place where the largest volume of your stakeholders are looking for information, and also to consider that it's at that particular point that they're going to make crucial decisions about your company. So it's effectively a shop window that you have online, and you need to maintain it in a way that you would through traditional channels. And I think the way that brands communicate during a crisis, when you think of press releases, broadcast interviews, website statements, etc., the value that ORM brings is that it can help that company promote and position its response to a crisis and ensure that that's visible when we're searching online. So no matter whether you're a journalist looking to pick up the latest developments in the crisis that's emerging, you're going to be using Google. If you're an investor that's checking the share price or considering your next options, you're going to be using Google, and so on and so forth. And when you think of today's brands and the issues they can sometimes have around customer messaging, so much of this begins and has its origins within searches that are performed on Google. It's where people start to make decisions about what is happening around a brand, around a crisis. And those decisions have significant impact on future share prices, developments for the company over the coming months and years. So that's why this is so important as a specialism.
As an aside, and I don't know if you have an answer to this question, so I'll just frame it as a comment. It makes me also think about what we're going through right now in terms of AI tools. And you think about like a ChatGPT, data only goes back to 2021. It's more than just a Google, and more people are turning to it for their research into companies, their information. You're going to get a whole bunch of history on any crisis that they're going to scrape from the internet, and the importance of having kind of your own reputation managed in that way and thinking about this, especially if those free tools are not necessarily up to date, if you will. But let me ask you, that was just a little thought bubble, but I want to ask you a little bit. You talked about this through a crisis. In my career, I approach and I advise a lot of clients that you need to be thinking about a crisis and preparing for a crisis way before you even know it's a crisis, right? If you're starting at the moment that negative story hits or that accusation comes out or the bad report, whatever it is, you're already way behind the curve. How do you use ORM in that sense? I mean, is there, maybe proactive is the wrong word, but do you think about it in terms of both ahead of a crisis and after a crisis for different brands?
Definitely. And I think traditionally companies have always been reactive when it comes to ORM, but that has definitely changed. And we know that because people like me exist and the specialism of ORM has developed in the way that it has. So like social media many years ago, companies are now being extremely proactive when it comes to establishing their online profile, and also being strategic when it comes to aligning their communications goals with online effort. So ideally, a profile is developed over many months and increases resilience over time. Of course, it can be used reactively, but the benefits that are derived from being proactive are significant. And I would say it goes back to this age-old piece of advice when it comes to a crisis, is that ultimately you need to be prepared. And I don't think that advice would ever change for a client. But I think we're very well positioned at Penta, given the technology and the expertise that we have, to cover off the three main areas. And the first of which I would always advise a client would be monitoring and ensuring that you as a company have proper oversight over all of the conversations that are happening right now that impact your brand and your positioning, and to do so in a way that makes sure that you're cutting through the majority of the noise that is out there. And I'm sure you'll be aware,
right,
social media, given the pace and the sort of quantum of the content that's being shared, it's very difficult to cut through that noise and to identify the sort of turning point, the inflection point where a crisis or a reputational issue might suddenly ramp up and become a really significant problem. The other is reputation tracking, which of course we're very well positioned to advise on, given our platform. But that's about looking forward rather than just looking at now, looking forward and trying to identify the trends and the emerging threats that are going to be coming further down the tracks that you can prepare for. And those two things ultimately inform the strategy, and using data to support the strategy that you come up with. And then from my perspective is deploying online reputation management to position you as best as we can to ensure that your responses are visible online, that the stakeholders are ultimately influenced by the messaging that you're trying to get across to them. And it ultimately puts you through to the point of the thing that really matters, and that's the overall narrative around issues, around your position. And that's where ORM can be so helpful to our clients, is helping ensure all of the above serves to improve the objectives that the client has. Yeah,
I couldn't agree more. We're doing so much work, it seems, these days, especially as Penta, and we've purposely or accidentally backed into the whole thesis of Penta, right? But as we help clients think about like what's out there on the horizon, right? What's being said about them, what their stakeholders are hearing and reading and being exposed to about them, how they're thinking about that. To your point, we use our reputation tools to measure, okay, what are the threats coming down the road? Where are some of our weaknesses? Where are some of our strengths? We've had folks on this podcast talk about our What's Next platform, where we can start to see a little bit of like where are conversations starting to bubble up online, and they may have a lot of energy, or we call it velocity, but they haven't quite hit that mass yet, right? They haven't exploded into a big public, but when they do, they could be a significant reputational threat for a client. Knowing all that and having something like ORM in place, as part of that product mix, thinking through, I think will be critical for clients, not just in the next 2 years as we go through some political cycles, both in the US and the UK and the EU, but just long-term, given where our kind of politics and the stakeholder pressures are heading.
Definitely. And as you were talking there, I was thinking of one element that's so crucial to the work that I do, and that is resilience. And it's something I talk to clients a lot about, because as part of the preparation of what you need to be doing now in order to mitigate the threats that you might be facing at some point in the near or distant future, if you build resilience when you think of your online profile, to develop and curate the ideal platform for your business to speak to your stakeholders, to do so in a way that ensures that when a crisis or issue does arise, that you maintain control over the conversation. Right. There's nothing more critically important, I don't think, to a business. And I think so many clients are good at the former, the traditional channels, and to some extent social media, making sure that they have a good message and that it's heard and that they're engaging with their stakeholders. But when it comes to resilience, that's something I always talk to clients about. And if you get on the front foot with it, you serve to protect yourself and your brand when something does go wrong.
Yeah, that's well said. Let's dive into a little bit of how ORM works. And forgive me for the question, but I'm happy to admit when we first met a few months ago, in the first couple minutes of hearing about ORM, SEO popped into my mind. It sounded very similar, and it is similar in some ways, but you and I met, you walked me through how it works, and there's a lot of big differences as well. So assuming our audience might have the same reaction, tell us a little bit, how is it similar to SEO? How is it different? Where are the benefits from that?
Of course, and it's a really great question. The complication, I'm sure, arises from the fact that we have SEO and ORM, but just to make it clear to the listeners, so SEO stands for search engine optimization, and it tends to focus almost wholly on search results that a client will control. So if you think about a client's website, a client's social media, these are things that you control, and SEO can be beneficial to improving the visibility of those things. The difference is that ORM goes one step further, and it considers and helps the positioning of all the other things that the company does not control. So when you think of media coverage, ensuring that it's optimized for Google so that it achieves the highest positioning that it possibly can. When you think about broader content that a company might share, and also the visibility of communications that are published either on a website or are shared through social media. These are all things that ORM covers off. So SEO is about what you control, and ORM is the extension of that. So it's the much larger, broader strategic picture. So I tend to come in contact with the client's SEO team on a fairly regular basis. And we definitely share common interests in what we do and the objectives that we have. But I suppose it's a blend of the two that creates the specialism that I lead at Penta, and helps our clients achieve the overall objective that they're heading towards.
And talk to me a little bit too we talked at the beginning, the news cycle is shrinking. It's getting faster, the pace of online news and news breaking on sites like Twitter and elsewhere. How are you using ORM with clients, their corporations, their boards, to kind of respond to that immediately, to those reputational challenges, in addition to some of the media relations stuff we talked about? Sure.
Well, probably 4 areas come to mind. The first of which is around establishing their position. And if they don't have a profile, because quite often we come across clients that don't have the online profile that they would want, that we help them build that, particularly if they're entering new markets, if they're looking at launching a new campaign, new brand, a new initiative. So that establishing of an online profile is very much the 101 of what I tend to do. But second to that is communicating narratives, whether that's the company vision, whether it's looking to future-proof particular areas that they would want to develop. But similarly as well, that leads into the narrative management piece. So this is about situations where clients may have an opposition and they might be wanting to have their voice be heard around a particular issue that might be contentious. There might be 2 sides in a debate that's playing out online, as so often they do. So we can definitely be of assistance to clients there. And finally, as you mentioned, is board profiles, or the profiles of senior people at some of these organizations. So I've done a huge amount of work over the last 15 years working with a broad variety of CEOs and other senior figures. And the reason for doing that is that they will tend to have a focus on ensuring that they maintain a profile that aligns properly with the activities of the company and the outlook that they have. So that might be developing a profile for an individual that's already on the board. We might be assisting an incoming chairman or CEO. All of these considerations are very important, because going back to our point at the beginning, where are stakeholders looking? Of course, they're looking through the traditional channels, through newspapers, they're watching broadcast media. They're probably doing that now on their mobile phone or on their tablet, whereas they used to do it in physical form. The reality is now that Google is a major part of how we all research companies. We look at boards, we look at individuals online. And so ensuring that is the positive and controlled picture for your company is really crucial.
Right. And no one tends to just focus on the company anymore, right? Like we're seeing, whether it's a generational thing or just the way our media is moving, people are showing an interest of diving deeper and deeper into companies. So I don't want to just know who Penta is. I want to know who Matt McDonald is and Viv is, and I want to figure out who these people are. And I want to see a company's ESG reports, and I want to see all of this. And I think ORM, like you were saying, working with maybe the SEO team and others can really help bring a lot of that to the surface and create a great reputation.
Absolutely. And to the point we were discussing earlier around the speed of media, if you think about the time that a journalist now has to write an article, it's incredibly short. It's incredibly short. If I think of the speed at which an article might have been turned around when I started my career versus now, the chances of even speaking to a journalist before it's published is very small. And because they've got such a short amount of time to turn around an article themselves, to research and write it, the reality is they're using Google as their first port of call when it comes to conducting the research. And so we know, as you were mentioning there, that they're going beyond the company. They're looking at page one of Google. And if there's something negative there, if there's something that's challenging for that business or that individual, the chances are it's going to be reported. So this is another reason why the work that I do and the benefits of online reputation management comes to the fore, is because if you maintain that profile properly, you're almost influencing future reporting and sort of media stories to some extent. You're ensuring that they have the facts, first of all, which I think is a challenge for a lot of businesses. And as you'll know, given the short amount of time that journalists have, they're often re-reporting things without fact-checking. And this talks to the misinformation element that I think ORM helps with, and that is making sure that the facts are there and they're present so they can be re-reported again. And you're only putting yourself in a position where issues are going to arise if you aren't addressing that and doing so properly.
I'm curious on that point. Are you, with your work, are you able to kind of prioritize a company's issues by some of their stakeholder groups? And what I mean by that is we have a lot of companies that they struggle a little bit because they don't have one priority. They have 10 priorities, right? And that might be different priorities for different audiences. How does your work kind of on the audience profile side of this manifest itself?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So I think the first stage of what we do within ORM at Penta is auditing. So looking at the various issues as the company sees it and advising them from an outsider's perspective as to how they might best prioritize those issues. And that's something that companies very rarely do. They think they have an understanding of what the issues are, but you can very quickly tell them, given the data, the prevalence of each of those issues and what the stakeholders are seeing, and should A really come in front of B if they considered in the right order. And further to that, as part of the auditing, is also identifying issues that they don't know about. And this is fairly crucial. So there are often issues that linger on social media. They might be within the depths of Google that the client hasn't seen. And this speaks ultimately to the emerging threats that we spoke about earlier, and identifying what is out there beyond what the client's aware of. So all of these considerations, I think, are hugely beneficial to clients and sort of serve to improve their perspective of what the issues might be by using ORM.
Yeah, that's great. Let me wrap up hopefully on a fun one, but I'd love to get, your serious thoughts on this too. I mean, we did touch on AI, and even at the beginning of this conversation, we talked about where we were 15, 20 years ago. Like I would have loved to have ORM when I was a press secretary up on Capitol Hill. If you think about what's happening now in the media, in technology with AI, maybe crystal ball it for me. Like in 15 years, what is this service going to look like, or where are we heading with it in the next few years?
Yeah, so I think in the short term, AI is going to benefit the work that I do, particularly when we think about content generation. So much of a Google profile is comprised of content from various websites, social media, news articles, etc. So being able to generate profiles through automation will be hugely beneficial to the time that it takes to develop a solid online presence for a client. But I suppose we're still aware between us of the issues around ChatGPT and accuracy. You also have to consider the fact that it's a fairly new tool, I suppose, to those using it for the purposes that we're talking about. But I think there will be benefits derived from it in the short term. In the long term, I would even say, having this conversation now, in the next 5 years, we could sit down again and I could tell you, as I will do now, that artificial intelligence will definitely become one of the main sources of threats to companies online. And the reason for that is that dis or misinformation campaigns, which I think will be waged against corporations in the coming years, are going to be sourced from AI technology. And that's going to be very much focused around a few things. I think firstly, computer-generated images, audio. These are two areas that we've already seen. I think earlier this year, there were the images of Donald Trump being arrested that were shared through social media, very much generated by AI. Could be believable to people looking at them. And similarly, video and audio that's been created using deepfake technology.
Yeah.
Hugely troublesome for companies where disinformation is shared so widely about a particular company that causes reputational harm. That then bleeds into elections and the flooding of social media feeds with information that's wholly inaccurate. And I think from a political standpoint, for the elections that are coming up, we'll start to see the impact that AI will already have on the influence of voters. So that's definitely going to be one to watch out for. But I suppose my main concern with AI over the coming years is the automation of profiles and the creation of bots and sort of armies of profiles online that can be used to directly cause harm to companies. And it's not as if that's going to take a huge amount of technical expertise like it would have done a few years ago. This is something that I think in an afternoon somebody could cook up in their bedroom and cause significant harm to some of the companies out there. And on the privacy point that we talked about and the profiling of individuals on boards, if you think about AI's ability and potential ability in the coming years to delve into the depths of Google and other resources of information and to identify information that might be brought back to the surface, that's going to be in itself a significant threat, I think, for the clients that we advise.
I think you're absolutely right, and I'm glad you raised it. We did a fascinating podcast connected to a white paper a few weeks ago about how a chief marketing officer or to the extent a chief reputational officer exists needs to be prepared for things like deep fakes on your CEO. And we tend to see this stuff in the political arena first. So I agree with you. I think the 2024 elections, will give us a good sense of kind of where this type of technology for harm will really start to take off. It'll be interesting then to see how quickly we can all move on, like, how do we combat that? How do we get tools like ORM in place to start breaking through some of that obvious, kind of deep fake and harmful noise? But it is coming, and it's something clients do need to be prepared for.
Absolutely. I think the one area we're well positioned on at present is AI, and we have the AI task force within Penta, and it's great to be in an organization that's so well positioned to do the forward thinking on these areas that are going to cause issues for clients in the future. It's the future proofing bit that's so important, and going back to our point about being prepared, and this is why it matters. I remember early on in my career advising clients about social media, and I spoke to banks and pretty large organizations who laughed at the idea that they'd ever have a presence on social media. And look at them now. I mean, They couldn't be more invested in social media. And ORM, to some extent, it isn't dissimilar. It's something that is understood by a number of companies. I think in the next few years, we'll have this conversation again. ORM will be a significant part of every communications plan. And I think the threats that might emerge from AI will be hugely mixed into that. And how do we go about resolving the problems that are on the horizon?
I think you're absolutely right. I think in pretty near term here, this will be a tool everyone has to have in their toolbox, and almost takes it for granted that it's there, much like media monitoring and a lot of other tools that have developed over the last couple of decades. But we'll have to have you back in a couple of years to see where these
we'll have to book it in now, 5 years time.
I'd love to have you back sooner than that too. This has been a great conversation, and I appreciate you coming on and talking more about online reputation management. And you've got a new piece that's coming out that we'll publish on the Penta website, and we'll include that in the show notes for the podcast as well. But Viv, I really appreciate it. Thanks for joining.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been great. Thank you, Brian.
Of course. And for our audience, I hope you enjoyed that conversation. For more episodes of What's at Stake, you can subscribe to the Penta Podcast channel wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us on Twitter at PentaGRP or on our website, pentagroup.co. I'm Brian DeAngelis. Thank you for listening to another episode of What's at Stake.